Elena Taylor spent several years working in theater as a playwright, director, designer, and educator before turning her storytelling skills to fiction. Her first series, The Eddie Shoes Mysteries, written under the name Elena Hartwell, introduces a quirky mother-daughter crime-fighting duo. With Sheriff Bet Rivers, Elena returns to her dramatic roots to create darker police procedurals. Kirkus Reviews says, A Cold, Cold World, launching August 6th, is an exciting combination of multiple mysteries and a thrilling fight to survive nature's wrath. Elena is also a senior editor with Allegory Editing, a developmental editing house where she works one-on-one with writers to shape and polish manuscripts, short stories, and plays. Welcome, Elena.
Then of course, I have to unmute myself. Yay, thank you for that. Fantastic. All right, guys, bear with me just a moment. I'm going to share a screen with you so that you can see my PowerPoint. And I need to know, now I can't see anybody. So Karen, whoops. Karen, can you tell me if you are seeing the whole screen?
I will let you know.
Can you see the whole screen there?
Yes. Yes.
Fantastic.
Perfect.
So you're not seeing my worktop at all?
I am not.
Okay, fantastic. Then the last thing I'm going to do is I am putting the chat up. Rick is going to monitor the chat for us, but I kind of keep an eye on it, everyone. So if you pop a question in there and it's relevant and I'm not going to address it, I'm happy to address it. So if you have a question as we go, feel free to pop it in there. If it doesn't get answered, you can hold it to the Q&A, or it means it's something I'm going to address as we go. Okay, I'm going to get started here. And I want to start with this slide just so you guys know a little bit about who I am and how to find me. And I will be saving this PowerPoint as a PDF that's going to go out to all of you after the workshop, so that everything that's in here, you're going to get these slides. But these are some ways that you can find me. I'm always happy to respond to questions. So feel free, even a month from now, if you're like, I was wondering what she meant by X, feel free to shoot me an email. I'm always happy to respond. I love, 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 love to talk about writing. So I am Elena Hartwell, and I also write under Elena Taylor, and that's all my contact stuff. And let's get started. We're going to talk about character and character arc. So how do we determine our character arcs, right? A lot of times we hear these kinds of, we hear this statement a lot, right? Agents and editors, well, what's the character arc? Or people talking about, well, I don't know, it didn't have a very strong character arc, right? What do we really mean by that? And the really basic, most fundamental understanding of character arc is where we start, where we go, and where we end. And you'll notice that follows that lovely 3-part structure of a book, beginning, middle, end, right? So where we start, that wonderful, very challenging part in the middle, and where we end up. And so assessing that line is going to help us understand what our character's arc is, what that journey is. So that first place, the where we are, right? We often call the world before, okay? It is all those events that led up to creating your character and the situation that they're in. So the bulk of it is in your head. It's not on the page, and it's nothing readers know, okay? The readers are only going to get that last little snippet of world before. Maybe it's chapter 1. Maybe in a short story, it's the first paragraph. It may even not show up at all in the beginning, okay? And it may simply be referenced later. So if you're starting with action and things are already starting to change, your world before isn't even on the page. So to step through my bullet points here, the life of the life the protagonist is living before the inciting incident, right? Inciting incident meaning the event that launches the story, what happens today that changes the world the character is living in. And as I said, this may be shown in an opening chapter, but it may also be referenced later. So for example, If I want to start with my character already in action, they've fallen over a dead body out in the woods, because these things happen, right? When you're writing a mystery, you fall over dead bodies. So maybe the opening line is, what the hell was that? Right? And our character gets up and turns on their flashlight and realizes it's a dead body. Their world before is not being shown, but it's still there. And when we talk about our character arc, it's part of our assessment. Okay. So world before isn't necessarily chronological. What we'll find out from that character moving forward is things like, I was out on an evening stroll. Oh, okay. Goes out for a walk every night. That's part of the world before. Today, something was different, fell over a dead body. I just had a fight with my girlfriend. Okay. That's world before, right? I'm just getting it later in the story. So when we think about world before, it's all the things that happen before the world goes into flux, whether it's in the book or not. The character could be happy or not. They could be in a good place or not. They may be stuck or not. It's not about going from bad to good to make a happy story. It's not about going from good to bad to make a sad story, right? It's not about going from good to bad to good. It isn't about that. It's about the change. Because we can go from good to bad to good, and you go, well, wait a minute. They were in a good situation. They ended in a good situation. There's no arc there. Absolutely. The arc is what's different in the new good. Okay. It's what happens along that way. So I want to give you a couple examples. Charlie lives in poverty with his parents and grandparents before he finds the golden ticket, right? Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. A lot of us probably read that as a kid. So that was his world before. And we do get to see that in both the movie and in the book, where he's living in poverty. The four grandparents are all in bed together, right? They got one big bed. So he's living in poverty. That is the world before. And that is what goes into flux and changes throughout the arc of that book. Dorothy, Wizard of Oz. Dorothy lives in, I love this black and white, right? In the movie, it's even black and white. She lives on a farm before she's caught up in the tornado that takes her to Oz, and her world feels small and closed, and she feels stuck, right? That's her world before. Bilbo Baggins, for those of you who are Hobbit fans, Bilbo Baggins lives quietly in the Shire before Gandalf and the dwarves show up. His life is benign and quiet and peaceful. And then Gandalf and the dwarves show up, and off he goes on these adventures, right? So his world before is a simple place. Dr. Watson doesn't solve crimes before he meets Sherlock Holmes, right? When you look at the very first book of the Sherlock Holmes, the original Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Dr. Watson's looking for a place to live. Sherlock Holmes needs a roommate, and that's how they meet up. So that world before for both of them, Dr. Watson's not out solving crimes. He just needs a place to live. Sherlock Holmes is already doing these investigations, living solo, and could use a housemate. So those are the world before. Oh, I've got new messages. Just going to double check. Oh, yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. The world in flux. Did I change my thought? Yes, I did. So let's talk about the world in flux. So we have this idea of this world before, and then this inciting incident happens, an event. And notice that I said an event, right? It is an event that happens. There is an action which moves the story in a new direction, which intrudes. Another word for an inciting incident is the intrusion. Something happens in that character's life that sets them off on a new course, right? When we say what happened that was different today, that is that intrusion, that inciting incident. The character is involved in an event. They may not be the one to start it, but they are the ones that have to react to it. And it changes that world into something new, creating a world in flux. That big middle is our world in flux. The protagonist may or may not be the cause, but it requires a reaction from them, right? And oftentimes they may reject it. They may say, Gandalf and the dwarves show up, and Bilbo goes, I want nothing to do with you. So it doesn't immediately have to mean they start acting differently. But for Bilbo, he says no, 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 until he says yes, right? So that inciting incident is the appearance of them in the Shire, but his world doesn't really change until they go off together. So he has to react, and the first reaction may be no until it's yes. And it doesn't have to be big, but it does have to be impactful. So, some examples of inciting incidents for mysteries. There's so many great ways that we can launch a mystery, right? Finding a dead body, that right there, hey, you are launched into something new. Okay. Being asked to investigate. Maybe you don't find the body, but maybe you are the person that has to go investigate. If you're writing a police procedural, right? The cops don't go out and find bodies. They get phone calls. There's a body, right? And off they go. And so that inciting incident may be simply that phone call. We found, dead body's been found and you need to go and investigate. Maybe they're being threatened with arrest or as a person of interest. Or they know a missing person, right? Someone that they know has gone missing. Some connection to the crime or the murder or the theft, right? Because crime fiction isn't always about murder. It could be a heist. It could be stolen artwork. It could be, as I said, missing person, right? So it doesn't have to be a murder. It could be learning about the dead body. Again, maybe not falling over it, but hearing down at the coffee shop, hey, did you hear we found this dead guy? Oh, wow. I'm a librarian, but I must go check that out. I love cozies, right? I love cozies. So, getting a cozy author into explaining why they're going to solve a crime is always a lot of fun to me. So it's something that brings that sleuth, whether amateur or professional, into the world of the crime. And again, it could be a small thing that is sort of the instigation of them becoming interested. They hear about something on TV and they don't really think anything of it, and then they come home and realize that person was their neighbor, right? Or whatever that is that brings them into the world of the crime. And then that last part, so first part, we have that old, the stasis, the original stasis, the world that the character's in before the book starts. Then we have all this flux in the middle of event, rising action to a climax. After the climax, the character has a new stasis, a new normal. And again, that's your arc from world before to new world order. It could be good, bad, neutral, right? Again, it's not about whether this is a happy ending or a sad ending or a good outcome or not. It's about the changes that person goes through, that characters go through throughout the flux, right? And it's the change that encompasses that character arc. The world in flux, and this is important, right? When we start thinking about how character and plot meld, right? Because you can't have one without the other. Plot is character in action. Plot is character in action. They are inextricable. So whether you consider yourself a plotter who wants to start from plot and sort out character later, or you are character driven and you have all these ideas for character and then you're going to figure out what they're going to do. It doesn't matter where you start. By the time you're done, those two things have melded. You cannot separate them out. Okay. Yeah. Jennifer, I agree. I like that the idea that something small can draw protagonists into the mystery. I think that's sort of cool because it's one thing, if you got a thriller and you need an explosion or whatever, that's fine. But there's something really interesting about having something simple, almost something you would overlook, that draws us into this mystery. I think that can be really kind of delicate and wonderful. Yeah, that I agree. So the world in flux are all the events that take the character from the world before to the new world order. And that is that difficult and often sagging middle, right? Which are so hard to write. So some examples of new world order, and I'm going to go with the books that I talked about at the beginning. Charlie and his family are now financially secure, right? He wins the chocolate factory. He gets to go and live there. The grandparents can now have their own beds instead of all living in one. They don't have to worry where their next meal is coming from, especially if they want to eat a lot of sugar. Right. So they're financially secure. Dorothy appreciates all she had at home in Kansas, right? And you were there and you were there, right? She comes home and she's like, oh, wow, my world is now in color. If you're going to go with the movie, right? She went from not happy with being in Kansas to going off and having these adventures and realizing it's okay at home. And then, Bilbo, he does come back to the Shire, and I love how it's built into the title. The title is The Hobbit, There and Back Again. And so the question is like, is he going to make it home? And he does. But it's now in his heart to want adventure, which is a very un-Hobbit-like thing to do. And as we know in later books, he eventually actually goes out on another adventure again. So he returns to the Shire, and it's still peaceful, but he's not. So he has come back very changed. Sherlock and Dr. Watson become partners in solving crimes. And so in later books, it's already established that they're a duo. But in that first book, and we're going to talk a little bit about how do you have a character arc over a series. In that first book, the two of them joining forces is a big part of their arc, right? In the second book, they're already partners. And so that arc is kind of done about becoming partners. And now the arc is how they come to work together, how they come to rely upon each other. Dr. Watson's always wanting to leave. Sherlock Holmes is always like, you're afraid of all this stuff. But they end up being very successful together. And that becomes the arc in the second book and the third, etc. Okay. So what drives events in the plot? And as I said before, yes, absolutely. So we have an amateur sleuth can want to solve crimes after their first foray into sleuthing. Absolutely. If you're writing a cozy series and you have a person who's quite reluctant and they don't, oh my gosh, I'm a bookkeeper, I don't want to solve crimes, or I'm a baker, or whatever that person does, and they do and they're successful, maybe the next time they're kind of looking forward to it. Right? Maybe they're even looking for it. And so what's exciting about that is to think about over the arc of their books, do they get tired of it, or are they looking for more? Do people come to them because it's the Jessica Fletcher, 300 murders later in Cabot Cove, people are now seeking her out. So how does it change their relationship with the community? There's a lot of really fun opportunities for an amateur sleuth. So as I said, character and plot are inextricably linked because characters' motivations drive their actions, and it is the actions which are the plot. So those things are working hand in hand. So I want to talk a little bit about super objectives. And I think it's really useful and important to understand this as a duality, a duo. We have external super objectives and internal super objectives. And keep in mind that a super objective is the arc of the book, right? So you have an objective in a scene. They want to get a person to confess, or they want to find a clue, or they want to get from point A to point B. That's an objective. They want to solve a crime. That's a super objective. That's the whole arc of the book. From the beginning to the end, they want to solve that crime. But even more importantly, I think, is understanding that we have both. We have external and internal, okay? Characters may or may not be aware of their internal motivations, but you, the writer, knows, okay? So events are driven by character action as the protagonist and the other characters act, react, react. They act, something happens, they have to react to this new thing. And that's how we build tension and stakes and scenes, by action, reaction, action, reaction. And every single one of those choices is being led by super objectives. Okay. And they're acting, the decisions they make are based on both those internal and external super objectives. And remember that achieving them or not achieving them, or achieving them and what that outcome is going to determine if it's a happy ending, a sad ending, a poignant ending, a bittersweet ending. I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. But just remember that it's those single large super objectives, internal and external, that are determining every single action. And if you have an action that is not driven by their internal or external super objectives on some level, it probably doesn't belong in the book. It's a scene that doesn't work. It may be brilliant, but it doesn't work. Okay. Let's identify external superjectives. Oh, and real quick, I meant to mention this at the top. If you didn't see it on my note there, do make sure you have a piece of paper and a pen. I'm going to have you write a sentence, just a sentence or two. We weren't not going to take a lot of time, but I am going to ask you to write a sentence or two. So make sure you have a pen if you don't already, and a piece of paper to write on. All right, external superjectives. These are the ones that are visible to outsiders, okay? They're often created by a character's job. If you're a police detective, you got to solve a crime, right? Pretty obvious. Everybody knows that's why you're there. Could be a relationship to another character or a sense of duty, right? But it's something that can be seen by outsiders. And they're not identical to the internal superobjective, but they work either in tandem or in conflict. All right. It can go either way. So for example, I have a external superobjective to be here today. You can probably all guess that my external superobjective is to successfully lead a workshop, right? That's kind of a no-brainer. That's why I'm here. And I don't have to tell you that for you to know it. It's my external superobjective, and it's going to be true for the entire arc of the workshop. I don't just want it to open well, right? I want that middle to work and I want the end to work. And so that's my external superobjective. But I'm going to have an internal objective, superobjective, that you guys wouldn't know unless I told you. So some examples of external superobjectives. A detective trying to solve a murder because it's their job. If you're writing a police procedural, if you're writing a private eye, if you're, writing anybody who's a professional who is trying to solve a murder, that is a very clear external superobjective. It doesn't need to be, yeah, my latest book. It does not have to be any more complicated than that. An amateur sleuth trying to save a friend who's been falsely accused. Okay, we were talking about as a cozy, you've got to have a reason why a non-professional wants to solve a crime. Trying to save a friend. Everybody's going to know that. Oh, George has been accused of this murder. I know he didn't do it. The police are looking the other way. I have to help. Everybody knows that, right? Very public. Private eye, trying to earn a living. Right? A parent trying to find their lost child. All of those things can be seen by the public and understood. So here's where I want you to get your pen out. I'm going to give you just 2 minutes to draft a sentence. Don't worry about how good it is. It does not have to be brilliant. Just see what you can get down. Whatever your work in progress is, whatever you're working on right now. And it could be something you've got a full draft of and you're in rewrites. Could be something you're just starting to think about and you haven't even written a word. That is okay. It does not matter where you are in this process. Think about your protagonist's external super objective. It has to be visible to outsiders, has to carry through the entire work. And so by that, I mean, it can't be, I want to start, I want to figure out who the dead guy is, right? That's not enough. Wanting to figure out who the dead guy is part of the story. It's not the whole story. Figuring out who killed him is big enough for the whole story, okay? So it's got to carry through from beginning to end. And once it's solved, right, we have our climax. And it's important enough to warrant central conflict. So if somebody's like, oh, I want to know who moved in next door, they're kind of weird. No, that's not important enough. I want to know who moved in next door because I think they're a danger to me and I think they're the cause of the murder. Okay, now you're getting to something that's important enough. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes. It feels like forever on Zoom. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. Go ahead and write that down. And you're not going to have to share these, but I would love to talk about them at the end when we're doing Q&A. So take just 2 minutes. And if you think you know my internal super objective for this workshop, you can pop it into the chat window. If you think you know my internal super objective, pop that into the chat window for teaching this workshop. One more minute. So we will share yours at the Q&A during the Q&A. But if you think you know my internal, you think you know my internal one, go ahead and pop that up. All right, go ahead and finish whatever word you're writing. And we're going to turn my little timer off. Okay, so hopefully you have something down for your work on progress. And yeah, Laura, I like your answers too. So we'll talk about mine in a minute. Okay. Internal super objectives. So let's talk about internal. So internal are not visible to the outside world, and they can only be known if the character shares the information. Okay. An internal super objective may or may not be known to the character. We often do things and don't really understand why. And there's some really fun things you can do with that realization that your protagonist has when they come to understand their own actions, right? So you, the writer, know from the get-go what's really driving a character internally, but they may not realize it until the end. Or if you're writing a series, you may say, you know, I got a 3-book contract. I've got this great internal super objective. I don't think the character realizes it till the end of the 3rd book, right? So you know it. It might even be clear to readers, right? But the character doesn't see it. And then in book 3, you go, oh, I'm going to let them land on them like a ton of bricks that they've been acting this way because of X, right? Bad behavior by a parent, abandonment issues, all those great things that we could delve into when we are looking at character. I love all of your responses to what's going on in my head. We'll get to that in a minute. And the internal super objective could be in conflict with the external or not, right? And it can't be identical, but it can either work in tandem or in conflict. So, for example, if a police officer, if a police detective is solving a crime and they are afraid that the perpetrator is someone they love, they don't want to solve that crime. Their external super objective is to solve the murder. Their internal is to protect the person who committed the murder. Those work beautifully in conflict with each other and create all kinds of ways to make a character act in a different direction. Misplace a clue, cover up evidence, send other detectives down rabbit holes, right? But they're also being driven by it's their job to solve this crime and how responsible are for the other person. It also could be something which is goes along with what their external is. So let me give you some examples of internal super objectives. A detective wants to solve a homicide to prove they're capable of doing their job. I don't know if any of you are readers of the Wallander series. I love, love, love the books. And if you have not read them, I highly recommend them. And if you've read some of them, I highly recommend you read the ending, because how he chooses to end his detective's career is really interesting. What he does it, right? That is a really interesting choice that he's made. And so having a detective wondering about their own capability is an internal super objective to prove they can still do the job. That's not external unless they tell somebody. What if our amateur sleuth is in love with the person falsely accused and wants to marry them? Okay, maybe nobody knows about this love affair. Maybe our amateur sleuth is in love and hasn't even told that person. Or they've been having an affair. So that is going to be something which is internal. People won't know that unless they share it. A private eye trying to earn a living is also trying to solve a crime someone else failed at or is connected to something in their past, which nobody knows about if they don't tell them, right? A parent trying to find their child because they had a fight and kicked him out of the house. Oh, well, okay. So externally, they're trying to find their child. We all get that. Internally, they're thinking, I'm at fault here because I kicked him out of the house, right? And now they're missing, right? That could drive them, and no one else is going to know that if no one else was around for that fight. So, work in progress. So, I'm going to share my internal. My internal is I want you guys to be better writers. That's what drives me more than anything else. A lot of what you said is true, right? Sure. If you guys want to buy my books, absolutely, that's great. But it's not my super objective. Polish up my workshops, absolutely, right? Those are real, but it's not my super objective. My super objective is for you guys to become better writers, right? That's always my goal when I'm working with writers. I don't just want a book to improve. I want your crafts to improve. I want your toolbox to grow. So I want you to take 2 minutes. Yeah, thank you, Karen. I'm going to give you 2 minutes again. I want you to think about your protagonist's internal super objective. It can't be known by other people unless they share. Important enough to thread through the entire story and not identical to the external. So I'm going to give you another 2 minutes. And go ahead and write that down. And then I'm going to show you how to put them together. You have about 30 seconds left. Go ahead and finish up whatever line you are on. Yeah, great question came in. So the external and internal conflicts are intimately related. Yes. Yes. They're not identical, and they may be in concert or they may be in conflict, but they are going to be interrelated. Now, it may be that what your character is grappling with is the mystery, right? Solving a crime and their health. And you say, but wait, those aren't related. Well, of course they are. Their ability to solve a crime is impacted by their health, right? If they are going through chemo, they're going to have a harder time doing their job. And so what they're grappling with is intimately related, right? It is integrated with what they're doing. And so if you say to yourself, wow, I have these external and internal super objectives really clear, but they have nothing to do with each other. They don't impact each other. You probably have a structural problem in that what you have given your character to grapple with isn't related to the plot, right? If it doesn't impact, if you're writing crime fiction, if what the character is dealing with isn't impacting their ability to solve the crime, it's probably not a great fit. You want those things to work together to create more conflict for your character, to throw up more roadblocks, to cause them to be unsure what roads to take, what actions to take, so that everything is a grapple for them. Do I do this or do I do that, right? Our characters are more interesting when they struggle. And struggle is interesting when it's both internal and external, right? When we see somebody getting chased, in a gunfight, far more interesting if they've got a broken leg. How much did we all love watching Indiana Jones? He's terrified of snakes. We know he's going to end up in a pit of snakes, right? He has this internal struggle. And so that scene works really well. If he had shown up to a pit of snakes and we didn't know he was afraid of snakes, it wouldn't have been a very successful scene. But it's a brilliant scene because we all knew it was coming, right? We knew he was afraid of snakes. We have to see him have that moment of struggle. So to answer that question, yes, we also want to make sure that the internal and external are intimately related. And, yes, I think that we can absolutely guess at a person's internal stakes, but remember, you guys guessed at mine and none of you got it right. You were all appropriate. They were all things that were true, right? But they weren't my internal super objectives. So it's okay if it can be guessed at, but assume readers are going to get it wrong. Okay, doesn't have to be clear. Yeah, super objectives drive the villain in the story. Will, I'm assuming you mean that they have them too. I'm going to talk about that. Yeah, exactly. We want to make sure that they're clear. Okay, I think I'm pretty much caught up. I'm going to move on. Okay. So let's talk about an elevator pitch. And a lot of you may feel like, well, I don't need an elevator pitch. I'm not ready to query. I'm still working on a first draft. No, elevator pitches are useful from the get-go. If you have an elevator pitch that really combines a strong internal and external super objective, right, which is all an elevator pitch is, combination of an internal and external super objective, if you have those things, even before you start writing, your first draft is going to work a lot better because you understand what the character's after. You understand what is driving them, right? It can be used to query, and obviously you have to have one really when you go to query, but it can help you finish a first draft. You can figure it out after the first draft and go, oh, now I really understand what's driving these characters. And as you go back to rewrite, you're going to go, oh, that's why this scene doesn't work. It's not being driven by their internal super objective, or polishing a final draft and making decisions about word choice or scenes that work or don't work. So you guys, well, let me give you a couple examples of elevator pitches, and then I'm going to have you do your own. So an aging detective determines he must solve the murder of a young woman or retire from the police force due to a lack of competency. That's an elevator pitch. External, he's got to solve the murder of a young woman. Internal, if he can't, he's got to retire because he's no longer competent. All I have done to create an elevator pitch is combine the internal and the external. A small-town librarian seeks to solve a murder and prove to the police that they have falsely accused the man she loves with the hopes that he loves her too. There's a cozy mystery. I could write you a successful cozy mystery with that elevator pitch. Okay? A private detective tackles a homicide investigation when clues left at the scene of a recent crime relate to her sister, who went missing a decade ago and was labeled a runaway. Ooh, that's pretty interesting. So she's tackling a homicide investigation. We all know that it's her job. She's hired to do it, but nobody knows she's also trying to solve her sister's disappearance, right? That's pretty cool. That could be a solid mystery. There's enough in there to carry a whole book. A father searches for his missing son, fearful that his recent actions push the teenager into the path of a killer. There you go. Internal, external, elevator pitch. So this is my last exercise for you guys. I want you to combine your two into a single elevator pitch. And I'm going to read you the one I came up for me. Elena teaches a character workshop because if she's successful, the attendees will improve in their writing. That's my elevator pitch, right? I have my external teaching a workshop. We all know that's what I'm here to do. I have my internal. If I'm successful, you're going to improve in your writing. Now, notice I did not say get a book deal. That's not my goal. That's your goal, right? My goal is that you become a better writer. What happens after that is your goal, right? I could have said that was my goal, but then I might be a lot more focused on industry, and I'm not. I'm talking about craft, right? So my goal is to make you a better writer, not for you to get a book deal, because your ability to write is only part of getting a book deal. You also got to write the right thing at the right time, get in front of the right agent in the right moment when they're looking for the right thing, and then they get it to a pub. That's not about your ability to write. Anyone can get an agent. Anyone can get in front of a publisher if they work hard enough. Doesn't mean they're going to get a sale. Okay. So now that I've given you mine and I've given you some examples, I'm going to give you again 2 minutes, and I want you to see if you can come up with your elevator pitches. And again, we will have the opportunity at the end to share those. I'm very curious to see what you guys come up with. Go ahead and take 2 minutes to do that. Got another 20 seconds. Okay, go ahead and finish up whatever you're on. So again, to clarify how these things impact a story, let's take my example. Had it been, I'm teaching a workshop because I want to sell books, my actions would be different. For example, I might have used all character examples out of my own books, right? As a way to promote them, right? Now, yes, I have the images up here, but I have that on all my Zooms. But my actions would have been different if I wanted to sell books. I would use my own stuff more potentially as a way to get you hooked in, right? Or if my internal had been to get you guys to come and work with me, I might have worked into my examples things like, here's as an editor how I would help you make this better, right? I would be modeling how I work as an editor. Now obviously you're getting some of that anyways, because I'm talking about those things, but my actions, the slides I set up, the information I included would have changed. And that's just like your plots. If your internal super objective is A, your characters are going to act in a certain way. If it's B, they're going to act in a different way, right? So understanding their internal motivations as you're going into rewrites or as you're working on that first draft can really help you understand why a scene isn't working, right? Or why I have no idea why my character would do this. Well, you will know if you understand their motivations. And so that's why having it really spelled out, I often tape them. Like I have an external monitor up here that I use when I'm working, and I will tape internal and external motivations on my monitor so that every scene I'm writing, I'm going back, oh, right, this is what's driving them. This is what's driving them. This is what's driving them, right? It can be very, very helpful. Okay. So hang on to those, and we will go back to those at the end of the end of the presentation. Another way that you can think about, and remember, all of this is going to what your character arc is. Your character arc is what's motivating them, what do they do, what's the outcome. That's all a character arc is. What happens, what's motivating them, what do they do in reaction, and what's the outcome. There's your character arc. So the more you understand about what's driving them, the more you'll be clear on what their actions are, the more you're going to understand what their arc has been. Another way to think about it is to ask what I like to call the big question, right? Every book asks a big question at the beginning, which is answered at the end. Every book, every story, something's asked at the beginning that gets answered at the end, right? And the big question can help illuminate those internal and external super objectives. And I'm going to give you some examples, but what is asked at the beginning of the book and how it's answered at the end is also about your character's arc, right? It is about plot, but remember, characters in action, right? Plot is characters in action. And remember that when you are identifying your big question, the answer doesn't have to be yes. The answer might be no, but it has to be answered. If you don't, you're going to have one of those books where you're like, wow, this was a great book, but I got to the ending and I was like, what's the point? Well, if you're asking that, it's because it probably didn't answer the big question of the book, right? So let me give you some examples. Will John Doe solve his latest homicide investigation or fail and give up his badge? That's a big question. Our detective, who's worried his fill in the blank, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, cancer, whatever it is that he's struggling with, whatever that health issue is, simply old age, right? And he's a little creaky. Can't run after perps anymore. Will he solve his latest homicide or fail and give up his badge? That's a big enough question to pull us through the whole book. That is the heart of the book. And that is using his external and internal super objectives to get to it. So you might say, well, I can't figure out what the objectives are. Okay, can you figure out the big question and then work backwards? If I looked at this question, I would go, oh, right. His external is solving the investigation. His internal is give up his badge. My question has provided for me. So you can do this either way. Know the super objectives and create a question, figure out a question, and then identify the super objectives. Because you don't want to use this in a query letter, right? You're not going to do it. You never, ever do questions in a query letter, but it may help you find them. It may help you find the elevator pitch. Will Jane Smith solve a murder the police already closed, free the accused, and find true love? Right? Either she will or she won't. Will Cynthia Jones solve the crime she's been hired to investigate and simultaneously discover what happened to her sister who went missing 10 years ago? Will George Brown find his missing son alive and repair their relationships? I know I'm really brilliant with my my fake character names, right? Very creative there, John Doe and Jane Smith. But all of those encapsulate our internal and external super objectives and are big enough to launch an entire novel. Okay. Remember when I said it doesn't have to be answered yes, right? So I want to use my John Doe example to show you how the answer dictates the ending. All right. And some of this is genre related. Will John Doe solve his latest homicide investigation or fail to give up his bed? Yes, he solves the homicide. He keeps his job. That's a happy ending. If it's a cozy, that's your answer, right? Because cozies end happy. It's part of the genre. No. He walks away from the job that he loves. That's sad. You could get away with that in a mystery, but not a cozy, right? If you are writing a bit of a heartbreak where you want your character to fail and someone else solves the mystery, because you got to solve it, but he says, I'm done, that would work in a mystery. It's going to be a sad ending. He does, but he retires anyways. Maybe he solves the crime. So that is yes. But he realizes that he had to rely on too many other people. He wasn't carrying his weight and he's going to retire. That's a little bittersweet. And I don't want to tip off everything, but Wallander series, that final book, does this beautifully. I highly recommend reading it because it shows you how you can make those things happen. No, he fails, but he realizes that solving crimes isn't all there is to life and leaves his position to spend time with his wife. Okay, he's failed to achieve his super objective, but he found something better. That's actually a happy ending, even though the answer to the question was no. So when you're thinking about these big questions as a way to understand your character, as a way to understand your plot, as a way to understand how you fit into a genre, don't just decide, how do I answer it yes? Think about what other answers might mean. It may open up something for you haven't thought about, right? And when we have a series where there is a long running antagonist, right? Like, we all know these series where every book is a specific mystery, but there's this larger mystery that gets dragged out over multiple books, right? Some of these answers to big questions may help you determine how to make each book a standalone and yet work as a larger series arc. So as you are either approaching a first draft or you're working on your rewrites, or even if you're getting ready to query, ask yourself, have I provided the right answer to my question? What was the question? How did I answer it? Was that appropriate? If it's not a happy ending, you didn't write a cozy, right? If it's a bittersweet ending, okay, but what if you do want it to be a series? Oh, maybe I need to rethink how it ends if I want this to be a series or have potential to be a series. Okay. Minor characters, and someone had asked a question about the villain or the antagonist or other characters. Yes, everybody has these big overarching internal and external super objectives. It doesn't mean you have to know them. If you've got characters that are minor and they're working great and they do the role they need to roll in the scene, don't worry about it. But if you're stuck, if a scene's not working, one of the ways that you can go in to fix it is to say, okay, I know why my protagonist is acting the way that they are, but what's going on with this minor character? And that can open up all kinds of stuff where you realize, oh, they're actually working in concert, or oh, they're actually working against them, or oh, they are part of the problem, or whatever. So understanding what the minor characters, internal and external superjectives are, can really help with that. We tend to think scene by scene with minor characters. We might think, all right, I know what they want in this scene, but you're still not making the scene work. Well, that may be because you need to back up and say, what's the bigger picture for this character? Even though readers are only getting them in this scene, their behavior has to make sense for what they're after. Understanding that is going to help you make that scene work better, right? And remember that a lot of stuff goes into a book that readers never see. I always, I worked in theater for 25 years. Nothing that happens in rehearsal that's a mistake, knock on wood, shows up in the performance, but it's why the performance is good, because you made the mistake. Writing is the same, right? Drafts are like rehearsals. It's where we work out what does and doesn't work. And so, when you've been working with a scene and you're like, oh, I wasted a whole day because I worked on the scene, it still doesn't work. No, you didn't waste a day. You have identified all the things you're not going to do, that the reader's not going to get. You have rehearsed that scene. You have rehearsed that chapter. You just haven't gotten to performance ready. And that's where understanding all of this stuff can help you get it to be performance ready. So I always say I'm very anti shitty first draft. I'm tired of people talking about how shitty a first draft is. Here's what I consider the perfect first draft. Perfect, as a beginning, a middle, and an end. If you have written a beginning, a middle, and an end, you have a perfect first draft. It is not shitty, because the role of a first draft is not publication. The role of a first draft is to give you the next step, which is rewrites. So I want to encourage all of you that, yeah, absolutely, they are rehearsals. You got to go through that. And so I think we need to quit thinking about them as a negative and see them as a positive. Obviously we're not going to go brush them off to a query, because that's not their role, right? The role of a first draft is step one on your journey. So yes, absolutely. Okay, let's talk a little bit about multiple point of views and multiple POVs, and I'm going to distinguish that from multiple protagonists. So let me take just a second to make sure we're all using the language the same. Multiple point of view simply means that there are characters who are viewpoint characters in a book, that they are not the main character. So for example, we've all seen those books where the opening, maybe it's called a prologue, maybe it's called chapter 1, and we're with the villain and we see the crime committed. And then the next chapter is our sleuth stumbling over the dead body, right? That one chapter had the killer as the point of view character, as the viewpoint character, but that does not make them a protagonist. Okay, so those are two very different things. So multiple point of view, it's when more than one character functions as a viewpoint character. And maybe it's, we have interspersed chapters of the villain's point of view, or interspersed chapters of the victim's point of view, or a family member, or an amateur sleuth who's helping out, whatever, right? It means that we can start to understand and be told and be shown the internal super objectives of those characters. Remember, I said that outsiders can't know what they are, but when we're inside a character, we can know. So maybe I want to show the internal super objectives of my killer. Cool, put me in their point of view, and you can do that. I don't have to guess. I can be shown what's going on internally for them, what's in their head, what's driving them. But remember, if a character functions as a viewpoint character, the author and the reader gotta know why. Why is it important enough for them to be center stage? What do they bring to the table the reader can't find out another way? And here's why. If I love the main character and I'm not interested in being in the heads of others, I'm going to resent you every single time I have to go in the other character's head. If it's not important enough, if I'm not learning something new, if it's not driving the story, all you're doing is taking me away from the character I want to be with. So if you want to have it, what am I gaining? And a lot of that is you're gaining the internal super objectives of that character. I'm understanding what's driving them. I'm understanding what's their motivation internally in a really different way. Related, but again, slightly different, is multiple protagonists. Okay. A multiple protagonist means that they are equal in importance. Gone Girl, husband and wife. They share equal page time, right? They have the same amount of pages. They are equally as important. Now you have multiple protagonists. I have to have internal and external super objectives that are equally explored with equal but not identical stakes. I do not want to read a book with Detective A and Detective B, and they're both trying to solve the same crime, and they have the same reasons for doing it, and they have the same obstacles. Why am I reading two characters? Why would I want to read two characters do that? The likelihood they're going to be equally interesting and engaging is zero. But if you want to show a detective who's failing and a up and coming rookie who's a hot shot, now it's starting to get a little more interesting, right? I see what's going on with the two of them. Okay, that might work. If I want to see the villain and the detective, cool. Now I've got something interesting to work with. I'm seeing two really divergent situations here. Romance is a great one to do multiple protagonists. You have the two lovers, right? You have character A and character B, and we're in both their heads in alternating chapters as they navigate a relationship. Totally works, right? Because they're equally invested, or you hope, right? Making a relationship work, or finding a relationship. Maybe they don't meet up until the very end, but I've been experiencing their lives back and forth, and oh God, they're perfect for each other. I want them to meet, and they meet at the end. That'd be pretty cool, right? That would work. But consider how their super objectives work against each other. We, again, characters in conflict is what makes novels work. We want characters in conflict. How can we set up these two protagonists that they are not in concert together? One of the examples I love to use is, because remember, you can create conflict without having a good guy and a bad guy. Take a teenager, and the teenager is graduating from high school, and mom wants that kid to go to college because they want them to have a career. They want them to be successful. They think that will bring happiness and fulfillment. And the kid wants to go travel for a year. Those are not bad on either side. They're both good choices, but they are in conflict with each other. So think about how interesting a book could be that goes back and forth between mom, who's been a single hardworking mom and didn't maybe have all the, college education and opportunities, and the kid. The kid's going, I just spent 4 years in lockdown, from a plague. I want to go out and see the world. And the mom's going, you need to go to college so that you are not stuck like I am. Those are not negatives, but they are in conflict with each other. So when you have these multiple protagonists, meaning two main characters, you can't have them after the same thing. You got to create that conflict. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about what it means when you have an external narrator, right? And how does that play out? So if you are writing third person omniscient, which is hard to do well, is less popular than it used to be. We tend to write not only in third person, but also third person close, right? A lot of suspense, a lot of mysteries are third person close, if not first person. But there are still some really successful books, third person omniscient. Harry Potter, right, is omniscient. And that is an outside narrator, a God's eye view, a character who's not in the book. They are a narrator voice, and a narrative voice that's outside. That character may not have any internal or external super objectives. Their only role is to tell the story. But what it does mean is that the internal and external super objective of each character is clear to the narrator. The person telling the story has access to that even when the characters aren't aware. So that's pretty heady, right? You really are God in that kind of situation, because you can show the reader everything that's happening internally with the characters. We can understand, oh no, person A and person B are in conflict. They don't understand they're actually after the same thing. Cool. I can show that. I can create that. I can draw you into the story by letting you have access into every character's motivation, right? So part of why I say omniscient is hard to do well is most people who try to write omniscient fail to use it to their advantage. There's no reason to be in omniscient if I'm not getting the full picture. If I'm not going to get the full picture, put me in third person close. Put me in first person. If you're going to separate me, right? If you are going to separate the narrative voice from the character, you're putting distance in between the reader and the characters because you have this external third person omniscient voice. If you're going to do that, then I want to be in everybody's head. I want all the dirt. I want to know all the stories. I want to know what's going on in the whole picture. That's what makes it valuable. And the biggest mistake that I see people doing that is they don't do it. They stick with one character. Well, then why am I an omniscient? Right? Put me in the character's head. So, another way to talk about an external narrator, however, is an active character in the book. So the narrator may be active in the book, but they are not the protagonist. They are going to have internal and external objectives to which we have access because we are in their viewpoint, right? But they are not driving the events. They just relate them. Dr. Watson tells the story of Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes is the protagonist. He is the central character. He's not the narrator. Watson is. Okay? So Watson has internal and external super objectives. And Sherlock Holmes has internal and external super objectives. But we only have access to Dr. Watson. So he can speculate, but he can't know, right? But we can know his internal super objectives because we're in his viewpoint, right? So that's kind of fun too when you're thinking about who's telling the story versus whose story is it, right? Probably the most famous one that gets used is Moby Dick is about Ahab, but it's told by Ishmael. So we attach to Ishmael, but it's not his story. He's telling Ahab's. Ahab is the protagonist. Without him, we have no story, right? Then we're just on a boat looking for whales. What makes that a great story is we're being told and shown this absolute obsession and what it does to everyone around him. And it allows Ahab to be awful, but we're not isolated. We're not, as readers, we feel for Ishmael. We like him. He is likable. So I can have this awful protagonist because I'm not in his head. I'm over with the cool character who I like, who I'm pulling for. And so there's some very interesting things. Yeah, Great Gatsby gets used a lot too. And so, because Jake Gatsby, I mean, it's the title of the book, Great Gatsby. Great Gatsby is the central character, but it's not, and Nick is the one who's telling the story. And so we can do that too in crime fiction. We can find ways where the story is being told by a character who is not the protagonist. So you think about why they're in there. But again, to reiterate, both those characters, the narrator and the protagonist, have internal and external super objectives, but we don't have access to the protagonists. It can only be speculation by our viewpoint character, but our viewpoint character can let us know their internal super objectives. So you can play with a lot of that. Can be a lot of fun. All right, what does this mean for a series? How am I doing? Oh, I'm doing good. What does this mean for a series? The best way I have found to think about how series function, right? Book one has got to be written like standalone. Okay. That is for all kinds of reasons. One, it's how you sell it. If you want to be traditionally published, the likelihood of selling a series is slim. It's doable. It happens, but it's slim. And agents are going to pick up your book that you have. They're not going to say, oh, I'm going to sell you as a series, because they may not be able to do that. So your first book functions like a standalone, but positioned to work as a series, right? This book is a standalone, but it is positioned to work as a series because publishers want that, but they need to see how your first book does before they necessarily give you a longer contract. So you write your first book and it functions as a standalone. When you go to write your second book, the first book is backstory. All right. It is backstory. People often ask me, how much do I bring in from the previous book? And the answer is as little as possible. Okay. It is backstory. So when you write that first book, backstory is in your head, right? Backstory is all that homework that you've done to figure out who your characters are and why they do what they do and all of that. That's the backstory in book one. Book two, you know the backstory. It's book one, which means you're not bringing much of that into book two. It's just like all that stuff you didn't bring into book one, right? All you're going to bring in is what a reader has to know to understand the story. Okay. So one way to think about it is you've got book one, you've got your world before, and the bulk of that is not on the page in book one. And then you have your character in flux, and then you have the new world order. Book two, the new world order is your new world before. Mind blown, right? You got to put this on a graph. Your new world order from book one is the stasis your character is in book two that has to get broken. So whatever the arc is in book one, wherever that character lands, that's the beginning of the arc for your next book in the series. Now, obviously, some of this is going to vary a little bit depending on how much time you're putting between books, right? If it's the next day, great. No problem. It is backstory. It is world before, right? You are set. If you're putting 3 years in between, okay, other stuff has happened that you got to figure out in your head that's not going to appear on the page, just like you did with book one. But you're still using that first book as your basis for your backstory, the basis for the information that's going to lead it. And that's true book after book after book, right? You're wherever that book ends, the next book picks up, that ending is your world before. So a character can have a predetermined story arc. Say you are lucky and you get a 3-book deal and you've written book one, and you're going to think about, oh, what is my arc over these 3 books? You're going to want to have some ideas because you're going to want to drop stuff into previous books that are going to play out and pay out to the reader over the arc. Maybe you're on a 1-book deal. You may not want to invest so much. So you might throw some stuff in there they might use later, but you're not going to think about it too much. And then you're going to get a book deal for book 2. Cool. I'm going to write book 2. I'm simply going to build on to that character what happens next. So if we wanted to take my current series, All We Buried in a Cold, Cold World, there are things that get established in a cold, cold world that do play out in the second book, but it doesn't matter if you've read the first one or not. It really functions as a standalone because it's just simply the next case my detective has. And All We Bury doesn't matter in terms of understanding what happens in the second book. But, right, there's a couple little things that readers of the first book will understand better in book 2. So they get a little boost from having read book 1. Oh, I know why that happened. Oh, I understand why that happened. So there's a little more joy for them because they're identifying things that they can point to and say, oh, I understand that. But nobody who didn't read book 1 is going to not understand the story. They are going to, it's just like not knowing what was in my head before I wrote book 1, right? In book 1, there are things I know about the character that never appeared in the book. Doesn't hurt the reader any. Same thing with the second standalone. Now, my Eddie series is a much more of an arc, right? This in that particular series, private detective, her mom's a nut job, she's card count and poker player, shows up, kicked out of Vegas. She shows up, wants to help her solve crimes. The arc of that series is her creating an adult relationship with her mother that she never had before. And we see her accept her in book 1. We see her work with her in book 2. We see her value her in book 3. So there's an arc of their story over those 3 books because it was a 3-book deal. So I had that opportunity to make those decisions as I was writing them. These are Easter eggs. Yeah, the idea of finding something, I think is what you mean by that, where you find something sort of cool and you're not out anything if you don't recognize them, but it adds something for those who do. And it also can work different ways. You can read a lot of series. You can read the first book or the second or third book of whatever, and then read the ones previous. And sometimes people say, "Oh, but it means that people reading the book already know what happens." Well, sure, but they don't know how it happened. So it's still fun to go back and read characters meeting each other, read characters making decisions. Oh, what were they like before they got married? Oh, what were they like before they had a kid? What those kinds of questions are still exciting. And so that's why series can work, but why books need to work as a standalone. So there's no right or wrong in terms of thinking, do I want to have a story that arcs over multiple books, or do I simply want to go, okay, I've written book one. What would be the next thing that would happen? There's not a right or wrong, but there can be disappointment. If you spend a lot of time thinking about arc over a series and it sells as a standalone and you never get to write those other books, have you left something on the table? Maybe. And so a lot of it has to do with what your contract is, what your process is, what your goals are, what you're looking for. If you're self-pub, you get to do whatever you want, right? That's cool. If you are a new author and it's your first book, think about it as a standalone. I wouldn't worry too much about this larger arc. People come back to you. If someone comes back and says, "Hey, we want it as a series," cool. You can put your time and attention in then. Okay. I have some final thoughts and we're going to do a giveaway and then we're going to open up to questions. And I want to talk about those of you that are willing to share your the elevator pitches that you've come up with as well. So some final thoughts. Knowing that internal and external super objective allows writers to understand why their characters do what they do. Sometimes our characters do things and it sort of works, but we don't know the why of it. That can work in a first draft, but we may get stuck a couple scenes down the road because we didn't really understand why characters did what they did. And so knowing it already can help those later scenes. I'm laughing because my dog is dreaming under the table and his tail anyways. His tail is whacking the underside of my desk. And so it can help us fix scenes down the road. There's also a lot greater depth to scenes if we understand why characters. You might say, "Well, the scene works great. There's no problem with it." Well, but how much depth is there? Are there lines or actions or things they could say or things that they could do which would up the conflict, which would up the stakes, which would up the obstacles? And understanding why characters do what they do is going to help you do that. It's going to help you layer more complexity into your characters. Super objectives create action, which builds plot. Characters in action is plot. So understanding them is going to help you make a more successful plot. Characters who change. This is going to come back to the arc part, right? Characters who change are the most engaging. A strong character arc beats a complex plot every time. I cannot express this enough. A strong character arc beats a complex plot every time. We don't always remember what characters do. We remember how they made us feel, right? We do not always remember every plot point. Sometimes we'll go, "Well, I don't even remember what the book was about, but man, that character was cool." We quote lines of dialogue that are great. We don't say, "Oh, this reminds me of," right? It's those really engaging, real, authentic characters that are what makes books stick with us. We're interested in the conflict far more than we are the actual plot itself. So you can use this information that we've been talking about in any draft, right? Knowing it ahead of a time can absolutely help you figure out what you're doing and drafting it out, especially if you're like me and you're an organic writer and you don't do outlines. Determining this information during a final polish can really help you, get better dialogue, stronger dialogue, because you can get all this subtext in there. If you really understand what's driving your character, subtext becomes so much more interesting. Well, what are they not saying? What are they saying but mean something slightly different, right? All of that is going to come in a lot easier if you understand it. And it's also going to help you show if the manuscript is query ready. If you can't identify these things, your manuscript may not be as strong as it could be. And as competitive as the publishing industry is right now, you want to have your strongest manuscript possible. And in writing a series, you can apply these concepts to a larger story arc or use them to build on each other. So, for example, if you've written a book and you have sold it and they want a second book, cool. You can go back to that first book and go, okay, how it ends is where my character is at now. What's the natural progression? How can I intrude on that? Say the book one ends and the character's in a really good place. Well, you don't want to keep a character in a good place. You want to throw everything you can at them. And so you can say to yourself, okay, what is it that's good in the end of book one that I can intrude upon to create a really interesting internal super objective here? Can I throw a health problem at them? Can I all of a sudden have them having to deal with a parent with dementia? Can I kill off their partner, right? I was watching Designated Survivor and they kill the president's wife. And at first I was like, wow, that was bold. And then I was like, obviously it could be contract negotiations, but from a structural standpoint, he was infinitely more interesting with a dead wife. She was super supportive of him and, beautiful and interesting. And so she didn't give him conflict. Killing her off. Sorry if I've given away anything anybody who's watching Designated Survivor, but killing her off, he suddenly had a new internal conflict, which was grief. And that made him act in different ways, which were more interesting than him happily married. And so you can look at how book one ends and say, okay, my new world order, what do I want to upend in the second book that I put in place at the end of the first book? And then lastly, the other way it can be very useful, the last way it can be very useful is if you get in a position where you're selling a synopsis. Say you've sold a book and your publisher wants a synopsis of a second book. Those are incredibly hard to write. As we all know, synopses are hard to write when we've got the book written, but to pull one out a whole cloth when you don't have any book at all, you can, rather than trying to sit down and say, okay, I'm going to write what the synopsis of this book is going to be, instead you can identify, okay, what's the super objectives of this character? What do they want? What are they after? And then ask yourself, what's a big question, right? And you kind of get that clear in your mind. Sitting down to write a synopsis is much easier because you can say, okay, I know they want to solve the crime. Here's the crime. And they've also got this other conflict that they're working on. Here's what that is. Write your elevator pitch and then just build your elevator pitch out into a full synopsis. Okay. I am going to do a giveaway, and this is the end of the slideshow. So I write some books on craft and foundation of plot and construction of character, and they're just little short guidebooks. And I want to give a copy away of each. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to end my slideshow. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Here we are. And I'm going to invite all of you to feel free to turn your cameras on. And for a moment here, while I want to do the giveaway real quick before I open up to Q&A and talk about your elevator pitches. So I want to see a hand up, or you can unmute, shout out. Anybody have a birthday this week? I got a hand up. Karen, you get one of them. Anybody else? Yes.
It's
Any
today.
Oh, even better. I almost said today, but I never have it happen where someone has a birthday today. Happy birthday. Wonderful. You get to pick whether you want character or
Oh,
plot. And then do I have anybody with a birthday this month? Anybody have a birthday in July? Yes, I got a hand. Oh, I got two hands up. I'm feeling generous. Susan and Jenny. So Karen, Susan, and Jenny, hang out at the end. I'm going to get whether you want ebook and or print, and I'll get your addresses. So you guys are my winners. So
all
I've got
right.
Karen, Jenny, and just in case we forget, and who was my third? Susan, right? Susan, you were my third. Okay, you guys are my giveaway. Okay. I would love to do both a question and an answer, and also I do want to give people an opportunity to do their share. So let's start with questions first. Does anybody already have a question? You can pop it into the chat window, or you can take yourself off mute and ask out loud. Yeah, Laura.
So it's very interesting that you're both an editor and a writer, and I sometimes it's much easier to find problems in other people's works. So, how do you manage to disconnect and turn the editor on when you're editing your own books? Or how do you deal with that other than asking for additional feedback?
I love that question. And I'm just pulling up a new blank sheet of paper in case people ask if I need to take a note. Oh, there, I've got one. That is a fantastic question. And I think that, well, a couple of things. I believe all of us need to have an understanding of when we are and I actually talk about this in my guidebooks. I think there's a real difference between our critical eye and our creative child. Those are two different animals that live within us as writers. And if we can't separate those two things, we're really going to struggle, because you don't want your critical eye on a first draft. You'll never finish it, right? You're going to obsess about your opening paragraph and never write the book, right? Because as I said before, a first draft isn't about being good. It's about being done. And so if you have that editor hat on, if you have that critical eye on, you are never going to do it. You have to be your creative child self when you're doing a first draft. You got to approach it with joy. You have to approach it with no self-censoring, right? So one of the things that, Betsy, you just made my super objective successful. Thank you for that. One of the things that I think writers should work on is when you sit down, you say to yourself, where am I in this process and what hat am I wearing? So when I sit down to work on a first draft, right? So for example, I've got this suspense novel that I'm super excited about it. It's brilliant. It's the best thing I've ever written, she said in her creative child. When I sit down to that, I don't think about, does this work or not work? I leave that at the door, right? Now I have another project that my agent's returning to me next week, and that's going to be something I have to read with my critical eye, because I've done the fun part. And now I need to go back like an editor and think about, all of the things that she's going to point out that aren't working. So the sort of long answer is, it's something all of us need to learn how to do, which is, what's my role here in this moment? And really understand how to shift back and forth. One of the things that I feel truly lucky about is I am remarkably, and I mean this as it has nothing to do with me. I came into the world, I have an ability to not self-censor, right? I'm just really lucky that way, but I also work at it. If I have those moments, and like anyone, I get a bad review, I give myself 24 hours. I get a bad review, I've got 24 hours to stew, and then I'm done. I have to let it go, because we all get bad reviews and you have to pick up and keep going. And so you can work at these things. You can work at, you sit down you're working on a first draft and all these negative thoughts come in. And one of the things I've told, I'm kind of going off topic here, but one of the things that I tell writers that really struggle with this inability to turn off that internal editor is you give it a name. I'm serious. This works. You give it a name and you tell it to leave. All right. So say you name it Jane. Jane, you're not allowed in right now. You're going to have to sit outside. And then when you go to edit, bring Jane in. Hey, Jane, you can come back now. We're editing. You can be critical now. But when I'm working on someone else's work, I can't bring the creative child in the same way, or I'm going to rewrite their manuscript. So it's a fine line. So when I'm working on someone else, the voice of doom, absolutely, right? Yeah, the voice of doom. But I hope that when the voice of doom comes into the room, when you're editing, you embrace the voice of doom, because by the same token, and this is what's so important and why you've got to have both, you got to be able to cut scenes and cut characters and be merciless when you're rewriting. Just like I'm merciless with my writers. You know, I have on occasion told writers, do you really want to hire me? I'm not going to tell you it's pretty. I don't have to read it. I know it's not pretty. If it was pretty, you wouldn't need an editor. That's my job, to point out why it's ugly, to make it better, right? And so you absolutely, oh, thank you for the question. I will respond to that in a second. You have to understand, whether you are a professional editor like myself or you are a writer and all you do is write, you got to know when to wear those two hats. And if you're really struggling with self-censoring and, oh, this is awful and I can't even look at it, you have got to stop doing that and understand that that is your critical eye, and that doesn't belong in the room when you're writing a first draft. And a lot of times it doesn't even belong in the room when you're working on your third draft or your 10th draft. It comes in, when you're like, okay, this scene works great. Now how do I make it better? Okay. Then the editor comes in and goes, Elena, what were you thinking? You started with dialogue. We don't even know who's talking. Cut that. Right. Did I answer the question? I got a little far afield. Okay, good. And for any of you who have not thought about that, have not thought about those two roles that you carry as a writer, I really encourage you to think about that, because a lot of times we are really self-destructive. If I get a bad review, and as I said, I'm lucky in that I'm pretty good at going, I'm a good writer. If something's not working, it's just a matter of time. Maybe I need to cut it, but it's going to happen. I don't go to I can't write, right? I don't really go there, but I'll get a bad review and think, oh my God, I should never write again. But again, 24 hours later, I stop that. It is out of the room, because you can't go there, right? You can't go there. We're all going to get bad reviews. I had a question about where you can buy my guidebooks. Amazon and Barnes and Noble. You can order them from a bookstore, and they are an ebook and physical books. So you can get my guidebooks there. And they're designed, I'll tell you real quick, we've got time, so I'm going to tell you real quick how they came about. During the pandemic, I taught a workshop every week for 54 weeks. It was just what I did. I'm like, this is how I'm getting through the pandemic. I'm going to hang out with writers. They were free. And I had a group of about 60 people that came every week. And people kind of came and went, but I did a workshop a week. And I kept getting asked, when are you going to write a book on writing? And I worked on puzzles and I stumbled around, and I was like, it's so big. And what dawned on me was, what we need is a short book on a particular thing. We don't need a book on how to write a novel. You need a book on, well, how do you structure a novel? Or how do you build character? Or how do you approach intentional rewrites, which is going to be the next one. And so I realized, rather than writing a book, I just wanted to do these little short guidebooks so that you can apply one aspect to your writing. If you read a book about how to write a novel and you try to apply it to your work in progress, you're going to fail. You can't do it all at once, right? You're going to look at your structure. Oh, here's how I can pick my structure. Now I'm going to go back and make characters more interesting. Now I'm going to go back and polish my dialogue. Now I'm going to go back and look for plot holes. I never do it all at once, right? All of my rewrites are intentional. I'm just going to look for plot holes. right? I'm just going to look for overuse of this word or that word, right? And so I like to break it down. I want to hit some questions that have shown up in the chat. Oh, yay. I love that. I love that. Finding an arc for your character. What are the rates for allegory editing? Yes, absolutely. There's a reason why we don't put rates on our website. So allegory editing, we do copy editing and proofreading, and we do developmental editing. We have 3 developmental editors, and we have 1 copy editor and proofreader. Basically, 5 cents a word for developmental editing, 3.5 cents a word for copy editing and proofreading. But we also have some packages where if you kind of combine things, those prices go down. We also do, like, sometimes I'll work on a partial manuscript or other things. So there's some flexibility in prices, but basically 5 cents a word for developmental and 3.5 for copy editing. Okay. Other questions about our content? Nobody had any questions. I always think, well, I either was perfect or so bad you don't even know where to start.
Yeah, I'm looking at, this is Rick. I'm looking at the list, and there weren't that many questions. They're mostly responses to the internal and external.
Yeah, which I think we can
policies.
open up. Let's open up the let's open up for that now. And as questions come in, feel free to ask them either out loud or in chat. Does anybody? Yes, Sue, the answer is yes. We do edit short stories. Let us hear some of your elevator pitches. Does anybody want to share an elevator pitch? I would love to hear them. Yeah, Will, let's hear it.
I'll have a detective investigating a missing child case confronts his reactions to the loss of his own daughter.
I need you to say that one more time. I lost some of your words.
A detective investigating a missing child case confronts his reactions to the loss of his own daughter.
Ooh, that's fantastic. Okay, so here's what I would think about for you. Yes, I will provide the PowerPoint. I'm going to send that out as a PDF. Here's what I would think about. So the external is he's investigating a missing child. Is that correct?
Yes.
So what is the internal? If you pull it out, separate it. What is it? What is your internal?
His internal is that early in his career, his daughter went missing, and he promised his wife then that he would find her, and he has not yet done so.
How does that? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, this will. His wife now is in hospice care, about to die, and he's feeling that she might die, knowing that he's failed his promise.
So how does his missing child interrelate or relate in some way to his current case? How do those connect?
Well, they connect in that he got into this case in the first place because the child's mother was murdered. He was investigating a murder case.
But how does it relate to his missing child?
And so now he's promised the missing child, before the child went missing, he promised the child that he would find her mother's murderer. But going back over the time, he failed to, well, he didn't fail, but he was not able to be a father to his own daughter because she was missing. So now he's not sure how to deal with this young girl who he's trying to help through this crisis, and then she becomes missing.
So here's what I'm going to recommend for you. What I'm hearing a little bit is plot, which is not a super objective.
Right.
It's plot. So when we want to, so I'm going to give you an example, which doesn't need to be accurate. I just wanted to sort of show you how you're going to think about your elevator pitch. It could be something like a detective investigating a missing child. There's our external. Finds, let's see here. So we want to make the internal. I would say his internal is more like he's either dealing with his failure, right? If he's failed completely, or does he find her by the end? Is he successful or does he fail?
No, his daughter probably was killed many years ago, and he's
Okay, wait, I'm going to stop you right there. I'm going to stop you right there. Did you guys all hear the word probably? A writer cannot say that. You have to know. And I think that's why your internal isn't quite working.
Well, no, as the writer, I know that the child is dead,
Right.
but the character
But you
doesn't.
are the one that's creating the elevator pitch. You know what's happening here.
Right.
A detective investigating his an investigating a missing child grapples with his inability to save his missing daughter who died X years ago. That's what makes the elevator pitch work, right? That we need to understand you, the writer, know more than the character does. And he learns by the end, right? There's some outcome for him. Does he learn what happens to his child?
No. Too many children that turn up missing remain missing.
Then I would probably say that, like, grapples with his inability to solve his own child's murder. That's probably how I would put something like that. But I like something that you said, which is the probably, which is you, the writer, have to know. You, the writer, do have to know that, right?
Yes.
Good. Excellent. Excellent. I have a question that I want to approach, and then we'll see if anybody else wants to share. I have that I'm an organic writer. Do I think about the arc for your character before I start writing, or does some of the arc come out as you write? So here's a funny position that I'm in. So I am super organic. I know where my character starts. I kind of know where they're going to end. I have no idea what goes on in the middle, and I sort it out during a first draft. So my current situation is that my publisher, I have to write a synopsis. And this is a little bit what I was talking about at the end here. I have to write a synopsis for a third book for Bet Rivers because they will buy it if I sell well and they like the synopsis. Well, as an organic writer, I'm like, I can't write a synopsis for a book I haven't written. Like, this is awful. It was horrible. I would write my, notes to my agent saying, this is the worst thing I've ever had to do. And she's like, yeah, I get it. So, in this particular situation, what I'm having to do is actually figure that arc out in advance, which is not a great place for me. And so I really have done just what we sort of talked about today, which is I sat down and I went, okay, I know the opening scene. I've written the first chapter because I had to do a first chapter and a synopsis. I've written the first chapter. Cool. Ordinarily, I would now sit down and work forward, right? And then maybe write the end and then kind of write a climax and then write all these other scenes. Well, I can't do that. So instead, I had to go, okay, I really had to get into the killer's head in a way I don't usually do when I'm writing a first draft, because I really had to figure out the why of the murder in advance. And that meant I had to understand their motivation. That is sort of the last thing I do. Why did they do what they did? Why did the killer do what they did? Right? That's usually one of the last things. And instead, I had to really get into that for the story to make sense, for the plot to make sense. And then I wove in what was driving my character. And so that is not a way I've ever written in the past. I've always been fully organic of like, oh, I'm just going to muddle through. I kind of know what it's about and then do a ton of rewrites. And so if my publisher takes the book, I can let you know how it goes writing the book. But that's where I am right now. So the reality is, given my druthers, I don't really think about arc until I'm, 20,000 words in and I've maybe written the ending. I've written the beginning, I've written the ending, and then I go, oh, I kind of know what the arc of this story is. And I write chapters out of order. I'll have, oh, this will be a cool scene, and I'll pop it in, and oh, here's a cool scene. Is it before or after? And I mean, I'm really that organic a writer. I think that as long as you know the ending, you can always get through a first draft. But to be in the situation where I have to come up with a synopsis, I've been forced to. But what was interesting, to go back to your original question, what was so interesting about it was how much better I know my killer than I ever have in anything I've ever written. So that's been a really interesting part of that process.
So you could do that arc process that you talked about for the killer too. That would be probably really good. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'd never really, I mean, here's how bad I am. In my second Eddie Shoes book, I wrote the first draft and I was like, oh, it's a draft. And then I thought about it and I realized I had the wrong character as the killer. I had to rewrite. My second rewrite was changing who killed him. And so it's been really interesting to shift over and be like, okay, I really understand my killer before I even write any of it. So that's been a really different process. So I encourage it. And I know you're working on your second book. So I think dig into that. And
yeah, so I find that comforting that you don't necessarily know the arc as you're writing.
No.
Yeah,
no.
that's good.
No. I because I'm so organic. Now, if I was going to outline, I'd have to know it in advance, right? So people who outline, I would really encourage you to be getting all of that in advance. And I think for us that are super organic, knowing kind of objectives or super objectives, or even what you think they are, can really help. Like I said, I tape them above but I don't usually get to those until I'm at least partway in and sort of have a sense of where we're going. Oh, that's what this arc is really about. Yeah. Awesome. Yay. Did I answered your question, right? Okay, fantastic. Other questions, or does anyone else have yes, Susan, either a question?
I would love some help with mine in grappling after your discussion here about how much to put in it. Okay.
Yeah.
A doctor tries to prove that he's not responsible for his patient bad outcomes, so he can keep his job, but more importantly, prove to himself that he is worthy.
Oh, interesting. So you have some great stuff there, but here's my question. Is this a short story or a novel?
Novel.
This would be the kind, oh my gosh, it's hailing. That was very unexpected. There's hail coming down outside my window. So this is a kind of elevator pitch, or going back to your internal and external, where I want to know if it's enough for a novel. So my first question is, do you have a draft yet, or are you in that early drafting stage?
Completely done.
And how is it that him not wanting to be responsible for bad outcomes is enough to carry through the whole book? What's the genre?
Oh, sorry. It's suspense and there's a killer killing his patients.
Cool. Love that. So as his patients are dying, is his only issue that he might lose his job?
No, his issue is he is worried he's a bad doctor. And the whole reason he's a doctor, of course, in the beginning, to start with, is because he had a bad childhood with an alcoholic mother that made him feel he wasn't worthy as a person unless he was able to give back like this.
Okay. What's his external objective?
Keep his job, keep his patients alive.
Keep his patients alive is way more interesting. All right. You've just shifted from me going, meh, he's got some bad outcomes. Every doctor has bad outcomes. That's not all that important. That's not that big a deal. You just said something super important. His patients are dying. He wants to keep them alive. That's got to be a part of the pitch. Do you guys all see the difference between he's worried about some bad outcomes versus they're going to die? Night and day. So now we're talking about something like doctor races, right? We're going to use those verbs, those good verbs. races to uncover why his patients are dying before he loses another. Like, do you follow what I'm saying?
But that's what I had. That's interesting because that's exactly what I had in the beginning.
Right. So now
there
you
was
want
no
to add
internal
in the
conflict in that.
yeah. So what I'm
That's
saying is
exactly
now
what I had.
we've got much stronger, but now we got to get the internal part in, right? So he races to save the lives of his patients, terrified he's the cause. You guys see how that works together? So now we have this wonderful, okay, the stakes are high, patients are dying. The external, he's racing to save them. That's his external goal, right? He's racing to save his patient's life. Now we need the internal. Praying it's not him.
That's excellent. Yes.
Right?
Thank you. That was the part that I didn't have because I had the first part, exactly the sentence.
What I said. Yeah. I
didn't
love
have the
that.
second.
I
Good,
love
thanks.
that. And so, but I love your example because there's two things in there that we can really learn a lot from. And the first was all of you registered the difference between bad outcomes and patients going to die, right? You want to word that as strongly as you can, right? We all perked up where it's like, oh, bad outcomes. I watch Grey's Anatomy. They have bad outcomes. That doesn't mean anything. Racing to save their lives, right? And then this fear that he's the cause. I'm immediately like, oh, now we're into suspense, right? I now understand your genre. Because first I was like, oh, are you writing I thought it was sort of like women's fiction or something, or, I wasn't even, I couldn't have told you that was crime fiction. Now we have this wonderful, maybe he's the cause suspense. So yes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sounds great. How many words what's your word count?
85,000.
Ooh, sweet spot. It's right where you want to be. Are you ready to query?
I have been querying, but maybe I needed the second half of my sentence, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you don't mind my asking, because this is great information for people. So you've sent out query letters. Have you had any requests?
I've had quite a few, you go from, you send 5 pages or 50 pages, and I had maybe 6 ask for the full, and then you get like a paragraph back saying, I really liked it, but not enough, and in this hard market, and so that's where I am.
But what's wonderful is if you're getting requests, your query is probably working. Now, if you've gotten 6 and you sent out 100, that's not so good, right? If you sent out 10 and you got 6, that's fantastic. But it will be interesting as you query more, if you tweak that, as I mentioned, and you have that in a little bit, it'll be really interesting to see if that ups them asking. You have strong comps, got your comp titles in there?
Yep, got my comp title.
Yep, you're in good shape. Yeah, add that little tweak, and I think I think it certainly engages me more. Yeah, good work. Other questions or anyone? We have a few more minutes, or anyone else want to share another? These are great.
I've got one. Elevator.
Yeah, let's hear it.
When authorities end their investigation, a father seeks to solve his daughter's murder and doles out his own brand of justice.
Fun. To me, that sounds a little more like a back of a book blurb than it does an elevator pitch. Remember, those are serving 2 different purposes. One is to get a reader to buy your book. One is to get an agent to want to carry it. So I want to tear it apart just a little bit. I don't think you need when the authorities end. I think you start with a father. Repeat what the opening was there, the first part.
A father seeks to solve his daughter's murder.
Yeah, there you go. Now, what's the internal? What's driving him internally?
Seeking revenge.
And revenge, he's going to do what? Is he going to kill him? Bring him to justice?
Yes.
He's going to kill him?
Yes.
I think I would, in an elevator pitch, I would state that. if an agent's not interested in being surprised by your book. An agent is interested in knowing, have you written something with an ending strong enough for me to waste my time reading the beginning? In all of my years, and with allegory editing, I'm our business expert. And so I have spent countless hours talking to agents, going to agent panels, listening to what they want. Out of a decade of doing that, one agent has ever said to me, I don't want to know the ending. One. I've talked to hundreds of agents. So in my opinion, it works a little bit better if I have a clearer sense of that justice, right? He seeks to find the killer of his daughter, and is he gonna shoot him in the head from a distance? Is he gonna poison him? What's he gonna do here? And let me add one more question, because this is really interesting, about how much I would show. Why is he seeking vengeance?
Because of the how his daughter was murdered.
Right,
Was,
but I had a friend murdered. I didn't seek vengeance. I just had sorrow. Right, I was sad about it, but I didn't have any vengeance. The person who killed him, what happened to them doesn't change the fact my friend is gone. So why does he need to kill this person? Why does he need to have vengeance?
He feels that this has taken the last family member, the last living family member. He has no one else.
Right.
His daughter was everything to him.
But why? But you're not answering the why vengeance. What you're telling me is why it's awful. What you're telling me is why he's sad. Why is killing that person satisfying to him? Does he think it's going to assuage his feelings? Does he think that he's keeping him from killing someone else? There's a reason why his response to her murder is, I need to kill that person. That's what you've got to identify. Do you follow me?
Yes, yes. And in his investigation, he does find the killer, and the killer is an absolute.
Right, but he didn't know that to begin with. See, guys, do you understand the difference I'm making here about, it's one thing to say the father wants to enact justice, kill the killer, right? But that is not an internal motivation. The why of it is the super objective. Does he think this will assuage his grief? We all know it won't, right? But is that what's driving him? What's going to make your elevator pitch, what's going to elevate it, for lack of a better word, is not what he does, but why. He's got to have a reason why he thinks that's the way to go. Do you follow me?
Yes, and I think he feels that this will end his grief, or at least give him the ability to move on.
That's probably going to be a stronger elevator pitch in an attempt to get past his grief. In an attempt to move on in his life, a grieving father chases down his daughter's killer to exact revenge. That's a stronger elevator pitch. Jennifer, you're nodding. That's a stronger, right? So I think I'm on the right track here. That's a stronger elevator pitch, because we're getting his internal experiences combined with what outsiders can see.
Why is revenge never considered a sufficient motive?
Well, revenge to do what is what I'm sort of saying.
Kill the person who killed your child.
Why?
So
Why?
he'll be dead, as well as the child.
So he'll what?
He will be dead. Your child is dead and he will be dead.
But why? Why is that the choice to make? You follow what I'm saying? Do we understand it? Absolutely. Right? Everybody on this meeting can say, yeah, if somebody killed my child, I'd want to kill them too. Absolutely. But why do we do it?
satisfying. I'm sorry. I think it's satisfaction.
To me, that's not a very strong pitch. I
I
understand
know,
it,
I know that.
but I feel like
the
there's more
why.
to it. Yeah, the why. So when she added in it's to move on, that's already more interesting, right? For someone to say, this person killed my child, I want to kill them, that's not interesting. It's average. It's what everyone feels. So what's more interesting is the why of it, right? Is it to move on? Is it to keep them from doing it to someone else? Is it biblical, eye for an eye? Is
Yes,
it, right? The why
then
of
move
it.
on.
Vengeance is too vague for me.
It's satisfaction. Satisfaction that he has met the just deserts, that he is now dead, and he inflicted the same punishment on him as he did on your daughter.
I
I'm
think
sorry.
that's super practical. I think it's realistic. It's just not as interesting to me. And again, this is personal, this is totally subjective. But for me, the more specific it's going to be, the more engaging it's going to feel. To go after vengeance is like, to have them feel like the outcome, they can't rest until it happens. It's already getting more specific. Does that make sense? Chris, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. I don't mean that you're wrong. Oh yeah. We are out of time. So as a final thought, remember this is subjective, but in my opinion, and in my experience, the more you can take it out of the routine, the expected, the cliche. Vengeance is cliche. I mean, that's the truth. Vengeance is cliche. The reasons for vengeance can be really interesting and intriguing and show why your book is about vengeance, but different, is new, is something more than. So that's why I'm saying to just say, well, they killed my kid and so I want an act of revenge. It's like, that's been done. Why is your story a little bit different? Why are you doing this in a slightly different way? What is it that I'm going to get out of this that is a little bit more? Does that make sense? And then we got to wrap it up because we are at time.
It makes sense to me. I mean, it's hard for a lot of people to go deeper and really get that internal motivation.
Yeah.
And this really has been fascinating.
Wonderful. I'm so pleased. And Susan, feel free to shoot me an email if you want to run some other stuff by me. I mean, if it's that, like, he didn't step up and he failed her, that's already more interesting than vengeance. Right? It can be vengeance, but why? Why? And dig into
Let's just say one thing. I come from a family where all my relatives were killed, murdered by various people, and
yeah,
very happy to kill them without any more reason.
Absolutely. And I think everybody would agree with that. From a fictional standpoint, it could be more dynamic. So remember, we're talking about fiction here, right? We're not talking about true crime, which would be really different. When it's fiction, you want an agent to understand why your book covers the kinds of stories that crime fiction readers want to read in a way they haven't seen yet, in a slightly different way, in a way that is unique. And that's why I'm after her to do a little bit more than vengeance. Just make it a little bit more dynamic. Okay, if my 3 people could hang out for just a minute. I have your names written down. You know who you are. Karen, Jenny, and who's my 3rd?
Susan.
Susan, yes. If the 3 of you could hang out just a minute so I can find out where you would like your books sent, that would be fantastic. For the rest of you, I will get that PDF sent out. This has been fantastic. Shoot me questions if you got them. I've loved hanging out with all of you. Great
Thank you,
questions.
everyone.